Back in 1987, CompuServe announced a new graphics format, and that's called the GIF. A lot of people like to call it GIF, but the official pronunciation is GIF. I personally might call it GIF while I'm talking about it in these tutorials. So the GIF format allowed for a couple of new things. Number one, it allowed for transparency. Simple transparency, but transparency nonetheless. It also allowed for animation. Now they quickly updated it so that they could change the timing of the animation so they could refine how the messages and stuff would happen. But the GIF format took the world by storm, the internet by storm, and people started doing a lot of cool things with it. Well, cool and kind of stupid. There were a lot of bouncing aliens and under construction signs and all sorts of stuff. And it wasn't until Netscape actually put it in their browser that it became really popular, actually, as a real serious animation format. Well, because people, of course, did all these cheesy things like that, once again. And of course, who can't forget the dancing peanut butter song Banana. Well, people started doing advertisement with it, but they have ads at first pretty much did a lot of this type of stuff. Click here, and you really didn't even know exactly where you're going and what you were clicking on it for, what the payoff was. Of course, it says get high-paying writing jobs online, but it doesn't tell me where. It doesn't tell me who it's for. If this was for, WordPress.org, that might be a lot different than some other place. Well, here's another version of that kind of bouncing click here type ad. This one is not very effective. And here's a modern version of it. It's a kind of a clever idea, the duck, 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 goose, in a way, but you really kind of get lost in it with the click here for recipes. That kind of turns you off from the ad, I think. Now, Fat Cow has done some ads recently even that still use this kind of concept of on and off, but it's a little bit more subtle in these ads. Now this ad I think is the right size. This one is actually smaller than its normal size. So here's what an ad might be able to be. Here it has a few elements that I think are a little bit better. Number one, we know who it's for. It's for Intel, HP. It gives us a little information about what it is that they have and what they're offering, what the benefits to us are, how much it is, and then they have a call to action, which is shop now. So advertising when you're using animated GIFs really does need some planning. And so here's some planning for a simple advertisement. You can see they haven't animated everything, but just kind of the background elements. And here's another one. So here's just a very simple ad where they've kind of planned it out a little bit more. There's only 3 frames. In fact, you can see the 3 frames playing right here. Frame 03. If I were to refresh that, you'll see frame 1, frame 2, and frame 3 eventually. So we've got timing on there that allows us to change it. Now here's another ad, and this one has 4 frames. The problem with this ad is that you don't really know who it's for at first, so you might not be as interested in this ad. For example, I have no idea that this has to do with Kodak. That might be a benefit, meaning that maybe they don't want us to know who it's for, but usually you want people to know. This one right here does have a logo in the background, but unless you know that company, you might not really know what it's for. So here's Microsoft. They've clearly said who it's for at first. Then they give you a little bit of information in the second slide. Unrivaled insights on Microsoft. Daily updates of news, views, and resources and analysis. And then it tells you where to go. So it's very clear about who it's from, what benefits you'll get, and what's the action you should take, the call to action. Here's another one that I think is kind of nice. And the clear call to action at the end. And this has a lot more frames, you can see, a whole lot more frames, because we've got animation that moves. It's not just on and off. So how fancy can we get? This really isn't a advertisement. Well, I guess it sort of is. It's more like an animated graphic. But this one is pretty darn amazing. But it has 150 frames. You'll also notice that the file size is pretty large. Going on, here's another one. This one is also pretty large. 1.85 megs is a pretty large file. But look at how amazing that looks overall. Now, what software was used? You might not exactly know. I think that this is going to be a pretty fancy software such as After Effects versus something like Photoshop, which is what we'll actually be using in some of the tutorials that are coming up in a minute. So here's another one. Oops, I skipped. There we go, which I think is really quite nice. And then the last one of this series is one that, if you really look at it, you'll notice that it looks more like a video than it does an animated GIF. And that's because it's actually 120 frames from a video. Now, they have a lot of the same colors, which makes it work in an animated GIF without doing a lot of dithering and problems with the colors, which we'll see in our tutorials. But you'll notice that the file size is really quite large. And that's larger than we would probably want to use on a website. Now, here's a small file, and you can see we've done an interesting thing here. They've simulated 3D by just having 2 frames that go back and forth. And of course, animated GIFs can be from video, and this has become very popular on the internet recently. In fact, they have whole websites that are dedicated to this. Another technique is called the cinematograph, and this has become extremely popular recently as well. What they try and do is have something that looks like it is a sequence of images, like photos, that looks very subtle and realistic. So here's another one. Really darn exciting. Now, what about if you start to mix the different techniques? This is an advertisement, and it could have more of the animation of this text, but it's also mixing that cinematograph technique with it. So one of the things I would definitely suggest is that you go out and look online, because there are tons of tutorials. So one of the places that I found some information is HubSpot, and we've got some stuff on the ultimate guide to using animated GIFs in your marketing. And this is even from 2012, so this is not that long ago. And this really shows how animated GIFs is becoming popular again, and people are using them for animations as well as advertising, all sorts of stuff. This one is for somebody, American Apparel. And here's one for Tiffany, which is very simple, but it's effective. And a couple other ones that are here. This one is that cinematograph look. Anyway, there are also other websites that are using it, like HuffPost is using it for an article about Ariana Grande. They've got a whole bunch of different animated GIFs in here. This is an interesting channel called tv.giphy.com, and it has just random GIFs that play for a long time. Now, some of them are, interesting, and some of them are not. Cinemagraphs are one of the new techniques in animated GIFs that I think are really quite exciting. And these are images, photos that have subtle changes in them. This particular one happens to be focused on fashion, but there's lots of other samples out there. For example, this watch, guy on a subway, bacon. You can see just a little bit moving there, the cat. So this is really exciting to see these techniques used and to see them have a comeback. So what we're going to be doing in the next series of tutorials is looking at how we can use Photoshop as a tool to create animated GIFs, and understanding how to save and optimize animated GIFs as well. So let's go on.